All right, let's talk about sword cutting and how to get into it. Sorry about the silly hat and mesh. The bugs are absolutely out of control, even though the temperature has dropped. Swarming, biting, stinging insects are the bane of life, the scourge of sanity, real-life Cthulhu. Makes me want to create a clean world, free of such abominations. You know what would help with that? Campfire Pro, the sponsor of this video. It's a writing software designed to help organize your background info, characters, events, locations, etc. With a world-building pack add-on, you can easily create magic systems, species, cultures, languages, and whatever else you need to make your setting deep and immersive. Maps, flowcharts, and encyclopedias help you keep an overview and not get lost in your own world. Especially useful for a creative but scatterbrained ADD mind. Whatever you write is private, inaccessible to others. There's a 10-day free trial and 10-day money-back guarantee, so check out Campfire through the link in the description below. This is going to be for beginners, so if you have no or limited previous experience and you want to start practicing, this is what you can do. So first off, what to cut. There's a number of options. Tatami, of course, is a good choice, but it's a pricey one. Because it's basically about $10 per mat, depending on where you buy them, a bit more or less. And that's a lot of money to spend on something that you're just going to destroy. So I'm just going to talk more about things that don't cost anything or are cheap. So in this case, one of my subscribers actually dropped these off. These are bottles of eye wash, which are expired, so they had to be disposed of anyway. So if you can find something like that, maybe ask around in places if they need to throw stuff out. You can even use milk cartons or other drink containers. The Tetra Packs, they work too. They're extremely easy to cut, but if that's what you got, then it's still something. It's still a target to use. So you can keep whatever containers you have and just fill them with water. Depending on where you are, do think about water conservation. It might be an issue. So if you can, use rainwater, things like that. Another option is pool noodles. You can use those. Those require a very sharp edge, and they have some downsides, but basically they do require good edge alignment to cut, otherwise they'll just flop around. Cardboard, I would not recommend because it's pretty hard on the edge. It's very abrasive. You can also make newspaper rolls and soak them as a cheap alternative to tatami mats. They can be a little inconsistent. They can be more difficult to cut depending on how you do it and how long you soak them, etc., etc. But if you happen to have access to free newspaper or whatever, and you can use that. You can also use beach mats. You'll sometimes find them on sale at a dollar store, and you can use them like tatami, except you need to use more. So we're talking like about 3 beach mats for 1 tatami mat, and depending on the price, it might work out about even, so do check it beforehand. Now, what to cut with? If you can't afford a several $100 sword, you can absolutely just start out with a machete. There's plenty of cheap machetes. Really, the only important thing here is that you have a good edge. Because if they're very dull or have terrible blade geometry, overly thick blades, things like that, then it's going to be really difficult to cut this stuff well. It's going to be easier than with tatami, but still unnecessary frustration. Then you'll just think that it's you when it's actually the blade. So I'm going to post a few recommendations in the description below. But yeah, so let's assume you have some kind of blade, be it a machete or affordable sword. I got a little ahead of myself, but this I should point out right now. For a cutting stand, there's a number of things you can do. You can build one. There's several different how-tos on the internet. You can just stack things up the way I did here. But if you're a beginner, don't do this. Don't use wood or metal or anything else that's hard. So if in the beginning your accuracy may not be fantastic. So if you want to go ahead and cut that bottle and you just boom, your edge is not going to be happy about that. So it's better to have like a plastic crate, for example, or something softer that you can stack that is not a problem if you accidentally hit it. So first off, the basic stance is essentially put your feet about shoulder width apart, I'd say a little wider, and take a fairly long step back and sink down. Just bring your body down so you have a more stable stance with the legs like this. You don't have to do it like this. If all you're practicing is just cutting water bottles, or if you just do it for fun, you can just stand there and just do it this way. You don't have to go to a stance. But if you're interested in the martial arts aspect, then I would recommend practicing this way. So the important thing here is that you don't just do this, just with the arm, because this is less efficient than engaging the entire body the way you would do if you had to fight. And also you don't have as much control, because if you just do it with the arm, you can throw off the edge alignment all kinds of ways. What is edge alignment? If you don't know, the edge needs to point in the same direction as the cut. So let's do it wrong first, just to show you. I'm going to deliberately do it wrong. So instead of cutting like this, I'm gonna turn it a little bit. If the edge alignment is very wrong, you can't even cut a plastic bottle properly. Or if you do, it'll fly across the yard and whatnot. The ideal is you want to cut it cleanly with the edge aligned in the direction of the cut. If you do it right, then ideally the bottom will stand and you'll just cut the top. The best possible cut would be sort of anime-like, where you just zip through and it just stays. And the top just collapses a little bit or shifts a little bit. The more is off, the more you're gonna shove it instead of cutting right through. For practice, what you can do is you line it up the way you want to cut. Just stick to a 45-degree angle, because that's nice and simple. Line it up, and now rotate your body. So the arm actually stays straight. You keep your arm extended and you just rotate your upper body. And then when you throw the cut, this comes from the body. Boom. Bottom stands, and you can also take a look at it. It's a pretty smooth angle here. Look, there's a little bit of scalloping here, but it's pretty good. Oh, these damn things are actually getting inside. They must have found the one gap in the net. Anyway, so what the fuck was I gonna say? These things fluster me so much. I don't even know what I was gonna talk about. Oh, insects are so irritating. You can also hang a bottle with a piece of string from something, but I personally don't like that very much because it gives you less information. It's easier to cut something that's hanging because then gravity helps you pull it apart, and it's not going to move as much. Sure, if you give it like a baseball swing with poor edge alignment, you're still gonna batter the thing and it's gonna swing like a pendulum a lot more, but it's easier and you don't get as much info. So it's actually better to put them on a surface. Where you hit the bottle matters, because if you hit it all the way up here, it's harder, because now, this wants to tip a lot more easily. It's a lot easier to move it here and tip it there than it is here. So it's going to be more stable if you cut lower down. However, you don't want to aim too low because of this issue here. On this particular bottle, I wouldn't really aim any lower than this. Ideally more here. Plus on some bottles, the cap is thicker and harder like it is on these, so I wouldn't want to hit them on the cap. But if I go just a little lower, let's mix it up with something else like this Spawnveer here. Thanks again, Quinn, for making it. Highly appreciate it. One thing to keep in mind with a single-handed blade in particular is you don't want to cut toward your lead leg. So if you want to cut if you're right-handed and you want to cut from your right to your left side, if you're a lefty, just reverse it. then you want your right leg to be forward. Because if I have my left leg forward and I mess it up, it's going toward my leg. And people have injured themselves that way. If you're experienced, it doesn't really matter. If you have enough control over it, you can have whichever leg forward. But as a beginner for practice, definitely cut away from your front leg. So you're standing like this, cut here. If you have your left leg forward, cut from your left to your right. And let's do that. Oh, in the position of the offhand, make sure it's not where you're doing things. In fact, in the beginning, I would recommend put it on your back if you're using a single-handed blade. Your left hand really, while you're cutting, or your offhand, while you're cutting, really doesn't have any business being here. Because this way you can, if you mess up, it's right there, you might cut yourself. If you put it behind your back, you don't have to worry about it. It's not gonna happen. So either on your back or on your hip is good, or you can also touch your chest and keep it on your chest. But again, in the beginning, I'd say just get it out of the way entirely. So if you're doing that, if you want to cut left to right, you have your left leg forward, you move it up like this, and again, commit to that 45. Boom. The 45-degree angle, being consistent with it is important, because one of the typical causes of a messed up cut is changing the alignment throughout. So a lot of people, for example, do, they start maybe vertical and then they do sort of a 45, or they do like something in between. And the problem with that is you're changing the orientation of the edge in between. The edge alignment is not going to be consistent if you go from one position to the other. Now, again, from a martial arts perspective, of course you can't always just robotically always assume the perfect posture. But for practice you want to be precise, because the practice is what's going to develop muscle memory, and that's what's going to allow you to do this quickly. So it's important to first practice it slowly and then get better at it. Speaking of speed, in the beginning, don't go like, better to have control rather than speed, but you need enough. You don't need a whole lot for bottles though. So let me just demonstrate. So just gonna do it really slowly. Of course, that's not gonna do anything. Let's do it a bit faster. See, it's already started to cut into it. This. You see how slow that was? Of course, in historical combat, you would not get away with that. Obviously, that's not enough. But for the bottle, to really develop that precision and muscle memory, you want to go slow at first, and then you can always increase it later. Let's try this falcata here for something heftier. So the follow through is also important. You don't want to just do this and risk stopping the blade like halfway in the target. Of course, so you want to follow through, but not too much. Like you don't want to be like, all the way. So what do you do with that? Well, ideally, your body mechanics will take care of that. Because if you use your body, if you use the core engagement and rotate it, then you can just stop it here, because it's not the arm that accelerates and decelerates, it's the body, basically. But with heavier blades, you need to make sure that you have solid structure in your wrist. What I mean by that is, just take this off. If you have a heavy blade and you try to stop it, and your wrist is kind of limp, then you will end up doing this. You will overextend your wrist. And especially if you stop it like this and you have the tendons in your wrist overextending like this, this can cause damage, this can cause injuries. So you got to make sure that you don't, you don't completely overextend it and thereby injure yourself. Particularly with a heavier blade, it's actually better to keep it a little, like not at a complete 90-degree angle, but a little bit in between. Like, make sure it's stable enough. And during the cut, you want to tighten the bottom fingers. Boom. That gives you a bit of extra snap. And that tightening also makes sure that the wrist isn't completely relaxed and just overextends like that. The arm can move a bit for this. You don't have to completely robotically just rotate the torso, but make sure that you don't twist in any way, you don't rotate it. So, but you can retract it a little bit, but this is the important part. So essentially, what you really want is for the arm to do not much more than just raise or lower, because your body rotation is going to do the sideways motion, and the arm is going to do the rest. It's going to do the up and down. So, boom, and also make sure you're close enough with different blades. You don't want to just cut with this little tip here, because that wouldn't even go through the entire bottle. Right, so what about cutting with two hands? It's easier, because now you have the extra hand to guide the edge. You don't have just one point of contact where you can kind of wobble around. Now you have two. So it's the same principle with the core engagement as with a single-handed sword, but now you want to power it with the offhand. And there is some disagreement about that, because some people like to cut with a push-pull motion, where they pull in with the offhand and they push forward with the main hand, like this. There are arguments to be made for either method, but otherwise it's the same idea. So you go to a 45 degree, raise up, rotate. All right, I think that's enough for one video, and I also just want to get back inside because this is insanity. The black flies and the mosquitoes have teamed up and they just swarm me like crazy. Anyway, I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Keep practicing and have a good one, folks.